Hiya, it's me, Galen. Galen's got Parkinson's. Like all these videos, this is not saying Dungeons and Dragons 1977-78 was better than Dungeons and Dragons now. And it's not saying Dungeons and Dragons now is better than 1978. It's just my recollections of my games. If you like that, fantastic. I love it when you tell me yours. There have been some great people commenting and saying how they got into the game and telling me about games. So I'm just going to tell you about games. There was always a bit of a tendency for a grumpy dungeon master to snatch the pencil off you and draw you themselves. And some dungeon masters, they did that right from the start. Oh, now you're going that way, and now you're going that way. I'm sure some still do. It's better if you don't, is my thoughts as an old gamer. Tell them they're going down a long corridor. If they can't work that out for themselves, well, tough. I know most of us came to use figures quite early on, really as placeholders, so that we knew where we were in the room. It's all right, 4, 5, 6 players having an imagination about the room. But at some point you need to know who's in front of who and who's in what corner, and so the figures came in quite quickly. I mean, the figures I used at this point were the early 80s up to perhaps 88. I'd stopped using so many of the pre-Dungeons and Dragons figures because they weren't really adventurers, and the new adventurers that were coming out were a lot more exciting. If you found a secret door, it wouldn't just be a question of what you're using. Perception. Okay, throw a D and add your perception. And the dungeon master will do the same and either beat you or not and tell you, oh yeah, you found a secret door. We would, actually, if there was a secret door and it was opened perhaps by, I don't know, let's say an altar being pulled, they would draw on the map little scratches where the altar had moved on the floor. So you could sort of say maybe a ragged piece of cloth under the altar, which shouldn't ideally be there. Which they give you clues, a bit Miss Marpley. The other thing that some bright spark at my group had the idea of doing, and it turned into terror rather than horror, was that we'd only have the potential of 1 hit point. So you didn't throw scores for how many hit points you lost. If you got hit, you lost a hit point. So the first time you got hit, it was assumed that it was taken on your shield, your armour. It missed by a fraction. But after that, 1 hit point was a scratch, and they were cumulative. So if you got 2 hit points, that was a light wound. 3 was a medium wound. 4 was a heavy wound. 5 was a debilitating wound, which could mean anything from coma, bleeding to death, crippled, paralysed, and a 6 was dead. But if you had a 3 already and you got hit again, that became a 4, and so in time you got to 6 and you were gone. Healing clerics could heal, depending on their ability, 1 hit point per day, 24 hours. So when you're resting, the cleric goes round and he taps people's brows with the damp cloth, put some ointment on. Bit of magic ointment, you'll be right, son. But if you got to a 5 or a 6, if you got to a 6, he looked and went, nah, nothing I can do for him. But if you were a 5, that it could stop it getting worse. He could stop you bleeding to death. He could stop your immediate fear of death. But he couldn't go to 4. That needed a cleric at a healing centre, like a monastery, like the Hospitallers or somebody, which then meant that the team were lumbered, for want of a better word, because they had a big, hefty, unconscious dude, and his weight was calculated by his strength. So if you had a barbarian who'd thrown 3d6, you had to have a party whose strength was the same or more than his to carry him. But equipment, loot, treasure, they all weighed things as well. You might have somebody with 2 big bags of gold over their shoulders, and somebody say, "I put one of them down and help carry him." I don't want to. I want the gold. So that was quite scary. That meant you veered away from combat. I'm sure the other players now just think my character is a coward because he spends most of his time hiding. Very rare does he get involved in combat, and even more rare is getting involved in hand-to-hand combat. He doesn't mind shooting people at a distance, but he's not a big fan of going toe-to-toe. But he is a halfling, so maybe that's an excuse. But part of that reluctance comes from those early games in the 70s where you didn't want a hand-to-hand combat if you could help it, because it was bad. It was a disaster. Could be the end of the game because you didn't have spare characters. If you were killed, you were out of the game until the next time there was a game. You might go and play a different game, but you couldn't carry on in that dungeon, and that character sheet, experience, everything went. Right up until the 90s, we used to say to get to be a paladin, you have to be a level 12 in the main roles. So you have to be a level 12 fighter, you have to be a level 12 cleric, you have to be a level 12 magic user, you have to be a level 12 thief. Now, nowadays, we wouldn't do that, partly because it's very unlikely to be magic users in the party because of throwing a 6 to even have magical ability. If you watch my magic videos earlier in the month, whenever you watch them, you'll see how hard it is to be a magic user in my world. So that wouldn't work now. So people didn't get to be paladins. There were only 2 people between 1977 and 1995, when the magic changed, that became paladins. And what they found, to be honest, was the reward of calling yourself a paladin didn't really matter because you were already level 12 and everything. So there was no additional reward. Looking back, there should have been, but there wasn't. Now you can come into a game as a paladin. We're just preparing for a new game. And I naively generated my character, assuming we all started at level 1. We don't. We start at level 3. Now, the other thing we used to do very quickly, moving away from the proper book, we start to say, well, you're not getting experience for killing every monster. A bit like if you've ever played Frostgrave, you get experience for casting spells, whether they succeed or not. If they succeed, you get more. And the game revolves around a wizard and his apprentice. So everyone else is a bit irrelevant. But that's where you get your experience from. We very quickly said, if you're in a game, you get 1 experience point. And every 4 experience points, you can have another characteristic. So an elf might want to move a little bit quicker. There had to be a characteristic in line with what your character was. So a dwarf could not suddenly become an archer. Wasn't within his nature. A cleric might learn a slightly better technique for healing. Not a spell, no spells. A cleric healed you the same as if you go to the doctor today. It was knowledge. But your cleric might have chosen to study languages. So he might learn another language. Or he might be able to speak Goblin. Now we might learn to read Goblin. right goblin, and so on, up to 12, which was the maximum. Couldn't get beyond 12. And that was true of all the jobs. Magic was to do with the levels in the book. You had to look at the book, you had to find the level that you were, you had to then find the appropriate spell. And it became time consuming. People got fed up with it. It slowed the game down. When people found treasure, and a lot of us were historians who were playing in those early days, and we decided that we'd base our worlds on a European medieval model. So we actually took the trouble to look up what would be the daily wage for a peasant, a yeoman, a stonemason, a blacksmith. How much money would you need to equip yourself as a knight? What sort of occupations would those people be doing? Where would they be getting their money from? The amount of loot you found was all relative. We weren't finding empty, bottomless purses that held the gold to buy an entire kingdom. If you found a gold piece, one gold piece, in the lower classes, that was like winning the lottery. That was amazing. So we lowered the expectations of everything. I think for the good. I think having too much money spoils the game, because you just glibly go and buy spells. You glibly go and buy the best weapons. You glibly go and buy the best armour. Instead of thinking, well, hang on a minute, I've only got one gold piece. And I've got all my expenses, and I don't know where my next gold piece is coming from. Power, unlimited power, weakens the cohesion of the game, because people with maximum power just plough through as if they've got some sort of nuclear weapon on a stick. And everything becomes about power, destroying, perverting, spoiling the game. Disarming traps with magic. Disabling large foes with magic. Finding secret passageways with magic. Changing the size of people to go through mouse holes, magic. None of that relies on having a halfling and a dwarf and a human and an elf, which again were the only 4 races you were allowed. They did allow half elves, which I haven't got a huge problem with. I don't mind a half elf. I can cope with that. I see characters in role plays alongside my halfling who, in the 70s, if I'd seen those coming towards me with big horns and cloven hoofs, they'd have got a slap on the head. We wouldn't have been saying, come and join me, eat my soup, sit by my fire. We'd have gone, bigger, get your axe out, attack. Monsters don't seem, in the early Gary Gygax tradition, to get harder as you go further into the game. So you start the game and there might be a demon pop up in the very first room. Then there might be 5 or 6 sessions with no monsters, or a couple of small monsters, and then a big monster turns up. Dungeons and Dragons has to be a story at its best. Have a beginning, a middle, and an end. They have characters, and they build up, and they introduce characters, and characters develop. And in the best fantasy stories, the greatest problem is solved at the end. I also think that's important, and I'm not sure how much we do that now. Just sit round for a couple of hours after a game, tell people what happened next. I'm also not a fan of Dungeon Masters explaining what happened. Why did that happen? I'm not telling you. It happened. People don't know these things. You don't want to tell everybody everything. Leave them with a bit of mystery. Let them sort it out themselves. And if they can't, well, they can't. They're not going to find out, are they? However, what I like about modern games is the attractiveness. I love the templates for the floor plans. I love the pre-made traps. I love the false coinage. I love the figures. I love the fancy doors on stands. I love the furniture. I love all that. I adore it. Absolutely adore it. So my aim is to take what I've learned over 50 plus years to then use that, taking the best of the old games. I keep the money very low. I base it on a medieval salary system. The treasure is all appropriate to the races and the ranks of the people involved. Magic, I've really come down hard on Magic to the point where it's rare to find Magic users in games. Clerics have special jobs, so they're not just traipsing along, only useful to administer health potions. Halflings have skills. I make them generally rogues and thieves. Dwarfs, lots of skills. And in the game, I create it to exploit those skills. The game has a beginning. The characters are generated. They know who they are because of dice throws. What's their socio-economic class? Who are they? Where are they going? And then from what they tell me while they're having that first night at the game, I am then able to, I know where the game's taking place anyway, but now I know whether they're going from that city to those hills or from those hills to that city because of what their story is. Then I set the scene. I might give them all something secret to know, like a little rumour. Perhaps they have a dream. And I give them a piece of paper a week or two before, and I say, that's for you. Whether you share the contents of that or not are up to you. And that's what I do. Then they meet. They meet wherever they meet, usually in a tavern, if I'm being honest. And the game continues from there. But it has an opening. It has a first introductory chapter. And then the game develops. They begin to discover things, perhaps not with very many encounters in the first instance, because I want them to get into the swing of the game. And then as they go deeper into the dungeon, either literally by going down into it, or metaphysically, or metaphorically, it's one of them, somewhat with a meta on it, it becomes progressively harder. Traps become progressively harder, from the simple pit trap to gas traps to the old-fashioned traps that monsters, the sort of devourers that used to look like floor tiles, and you trod on them and they came up like Venus flytraps. Chuck a couple of them in just for fun. And then have a theme. Don't have random stuff popping up. Have a theme. If you're dealing with the undead, everything should be to do with the undead. If it's about goblins, make it about goblins. I don't want to read a book where the first part of the book sets off in Lord of the Rings and then chapter 5 switches to Star Trek, build up to a crescendo and have a dramatic, dynamic end. And if characters are going to die, that's really generally, unless they're suffering from terminal stupidity, where they should die. And it doesn't matter then because the game's nearly over. And then at the end, have a conclusion to the story, and a plenary session where people have a pint and chat over what's happened, see what they think. But all the time using the modern, beautiful things that we've been provided with. Why? I'm not a Luddite. Why would I throw away all these wonderful models and plans and doors and traps when they enhance the look of the game. But I do think those early concepts are vitally important. And you can tell me, on the comments, tell me your favourite book that does not have a beginning, a middle and an end. Metamorphosis, I don't know. I don't know. Anyway, I don't know. I'd sort of intended to start by saying all Dungeons and Dragons is wonderful, and I suspect what I've done is make it sound like I think the old days are best, but I don't. I don't think they're the best. I love my modern games. I just think we should be a bit careful about how we structure them. And the final thing I'm going to say is a note of warning to Dungeon Masters, especially if you're the Dungeon Master who runs the game and no one helps you, no one takes the next game. Finish a game. Have an end. Have a story in your head so you know why it's happening, how it's happening, and what the conclusion is. Because if it doesn't end and it just drifts on, and they go to a town and they solve that problem, then you set them another problem and they drift off to that town, it gets boring. And I'm sorry to use the B word. I'm sure there are a lot of words that YouTube don't like you to say. Boring should be on that list. Stop it. Do you hate me now? Oh well, everybody hates me anyway. Ah, chuck.